Let me begin by telling you a story. In the strange and far-off times, O best beloved, the elephant had no trunk. He had just a bulgy, blackish nose as big as a boot that he could wriggle about from side to side, but he couldn't pick up things with it. But there was one elephant, a young elephant, an elephant's child, who was filled with satiable curiosity, which means that he asked ever so many questions. This is the opening paragraph of Rudyard Kipling's story, The Elephant's Child, or How the Elephant Got His Trunk. And I'm telling it to you today because I'm not here to talk about elephants. I wish I was, but I'm not. I'm here to talk to you about blind spots, which I believe are the single biggest organization killer on the planet. The elephant's child had two of them. You'll learn about them in a minute. And thanks to a friend, he was able to avoid being the victim of them. My job here today is to show you how to not be victims to your own blind spots. Because you see, I have them, you have them, organizations have them by the bucket load, and the elephant's child had them. So let me tell you the story real quick, just so you kind of know what's going on here. The elephant's child was curious, very curious, constantly asking questions. Who, what, when, where, why, how. But every time he did, the questions he posed were to his adult family members. And of course, adults being adults, every time they were asked a question, they rarely knew the answer. And rather than say something like, I'll go look it up, or I'm sorry, I don't know, they beat him. They just kind of whacked him about. But it didn't slow him down. He kept asking question after question after question, until one day he asked the question that he never should have asked, sort of the he who must not be named question. He said, what does the crocodile have for dinner? And they really let him have it on that one. So finally he said, all right, I'm going to go find out for myself. So as Kipling writes the story, he went from Grahamstown to Kimberley, and from Kimberley he went north by east to Kama's country, and from Kama's country he came to the banks of the great gray green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, where he met the cola bird sitting in the wait-a-bit thorn bush. And he said to the bird, pardon me, but have you seen a crocodile around these parts? And the cola bird said, yes, if you'll wander over to yonder limpid stream, you'll find one. So he went over to the river, and sure enough, he found a crocodile sitting there, and went up to the crocodile, and he said, excuse me, but I've asked all of my adult relatives what the crocodile has for dinner, but every time I ask them, they beat me. Well, you're the crocodile. So I was wondering, could I ask you what you have for dinner? And the crocodile said, why, yes, of course. Come a little closer. We know this is not going to end well, right? Okay, so he does, and of course the crocodile does, leaps out of the water, grabs him by his bulgy, blackish nose about the size of a boot, and proceeds to pull him into the water to demonstrate what he has for dinner. Well, sitting over there on that big flat rock is the bicolored python rock snake, who takes pity on the elephant's child and wraps himself around the elephant's child's rear legs, wraps his other end around a tree, and begins to pull. And pretty soon, the combined strength of the elephant's child, who of course has set his legs in the mud, and the python is too much for the crocodile. He lets go. The elephant, of course, with a mighty plop, goes rolling over backwards, falls down on the side of the lake, looks down at this horrible disfigurement on the front of his face. His little nose has now become this long, horrible, ugly thing. So he wraps it in banana leaves and lies it down in the cold water of the river. And the python looks at him and says, what are you doing? And he says, I'm waiting for my nose to shrink. And the python says, that's not going to happen. And he says, but look at me. I'm disfigured. I mean, this is horrible. And the python says, you know, some people don't see a good thing when it's sitting right in front of their face. And right about that time, a tsetse fly, sometimes called a dik-dik fly in Africa, bites the elephant's child on his shoulder, and without even thinking about it, he lifts up this new horrible disfigurement and smacks that fly deader than dead. To which the python says, advantage number one. And then the python says to the elephant's child, you know, after all you've been through, you've got to be hungry. And the elephant's child says, well, yes, I am. And he reaches down without thinking about it with his newfound trunk and grabs a handful of grass, stuffs it in his mouth. And this is when he starts to realize there must be something to this. And the python says, advantage number two. And then the python says to the elephant's child, you know, you've told me a little bit about your history, about your family, about how they treat you. You know, given what you've just learned and given this newfound thing you have on the front of your face, I just have to believe that you kind of want to go beat somebody up right about now. And he says, well, yes, I would. He said, well, why don't you go do that? So the elephant's child heads back to his family, and he arrives in the area where he lives, and his family is standing there, and they look at him and they say, where have you been? And he says, I've been to the river to meet the crocodile, to find out what he has for dinner. And his uncle, the hairy baboon, comes up to him and says, well, what happened to your nose? And he says, it was a gift from the crocodile. He gave it to me when I came to visit. And the baboon says, well, it's quite ugly. And the elephant's child says, yes, but it's quite useful. And he picks him up by his hairy paw and throws him into a hornet's nest. Let me tell you why I'm telling you this story. The elephant's child had 2 blind spots, and they almost led to his demise. Blind spot number 1, apparently when you ask questions, you get beaten. That's the social contract. If I ask a question, I'm going to get hit, so that's just the way it is. That's the status quo. That's the way it is. The second blind spot he had was this blind spot that said, I've been disfigured. This thing on my face has now made me a lesser elephant. It took the python, his Obi-Wan Kenobi, if you will, to make him realize that these, in fact, weren't disadvantages at all. These were not disabilities. These were not bad things. These, in fact, were good things, as long as he was able to see them through a different set of eyes. The reason I'm telling you this story through the eyes of the elephant's child is because, first of all, I have the post-lunch slot, and I have to do something to keep you awake after that lunch. But second of all, because the elephant's child book, even though it's a tiny little 2,500-word children's story that was written in 1902, illustrates brilliantly the hazard of blind spots. Let me tell you why they're bad. The reason we have blind spots is because we become accustomed to seeing things the way they are, and we come to simply accept the way things are. That's just the way it is. You all know the phrases, good enough is good enough. How often have you heard that in corporate rooms? How often have you heard someone at your office, jokingly or not, make the comment, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? There's a reason my hero Tom Peters wrote a very, very well-known article called, If It Ain't Broke, Break It. Because the chances are very good that the only reason you're saying that things are okay is because you've been looking at it for so long that you've just come to accept the fact that it's okay. So I want you to take it from me and from the elephant's child that it's not okay. That what's really important is to see these challenges through a different set of eyes, and I'm going to show you how to do it. It's very, very simple. What you want to do is you want to go find someone who knows your job. They don't do your job because if they do, the chances are very good that they'll have the same blind spots you have. But you want someone who understands what the output of your job is. You bring them in and you sit them down. And you're going to ask them 5 very simple questions. Question number 1. What do I do well? Now, there is a caveat to this little exercise here. You are required to listen to the answer and act on it. That's important. Question number 2. What could I do better? Question number 3. What am I doing in my daily job, my daily routine that in fact should be done by someone else? Number 4, can you tell me anything that I should be doing that is being done by another person that by all rights shouldn't have to do it? And number 5, if you could wave your Hermione Granger magic wand and change one thing about the way I do my job, or one thing about the way this company works, what would it be? If you can get answers to those questions and then choose to act on those answers, you will remove every blind spot you have. Do you know what your blind spots are? Don't you want to? Thank you.